Hello, this is Just Listen, hosted by George. Today is July 14th, 2025. I hope everybody had a good weekend. What we want to talk about today is the U.S. federal government policy on school choice. This is a win for taxpayers who have kids in K 12 schools to get funding to assist with tuition in private schools. So, what we are specifically talking about is the Educational Choice for Children Act, which was in the Senate when it was passed by the House of Representatives. And as you know, once it got to the Senate, it got changed. And I'll talk about what it got changed to a little bit later. I want to give a quick background story. This issue with school choice actually goes back to when I was in school, and that means that it was a while ago. So I remember that in the early 80s when I was in 12th grade that my dad would talk about how if he put my younger brother and sister in a private school that they would have to pay for it because they made too much money. So after I left home, they ended up putting my brother and sister into a private Christian school. The reason I'm telling you the story is there is some rhetoric out there that this program only benefits the billionaires, like you're giving them tax breaks. That is not true. If my parents were billionaires, I would have known it. And if they were millionaires, they had to come out of pocket to pay for the private school. Now, there's various reasons that I'll talk about later, in my opinion, that they had to do it. All right. So, the law that was passed was it's a tax credit that will go to individuals or corporations who donate to nonprofits that offer educational scholarships to students looking for options outside of the traditional public school. So, the qualified expenses, and this is part of that ECCA, is certain qualified expenses such as tuition, fees, tutoring, and supplies for students at public, private, or religious schools. It also covers transportation, room and board, and computer equipment. Now, these are the facts. This is all that this covers. Now, the other side is saying, like I previously said, that it's giving billionaires and millionaires tax exemptions so that they don't have to pay for tuition. Now, here is what the other side is saying that I think is totally wrong. So, the American Federation of Teachers slammed the bill for promoting a massive and unprecedented transfer of wealth from everyday people to billionaires. That's what I was telling you. When my parents put my brother and sister in the private school, they were not billionaires, even millionaires. They probably weren't even half millionaires. Okay? So the notion that this is out there to help the wealthy makes no sense. And the reason that I want to talk about this first point is because across the board, it seems like in this country that the Democrats, and I have to blame it on them a little bit, if you are working hard and you're making over $50,000 a year, they seem to think that you should pay full price for everything. And then if you're making under that, that is totally free. right? So when my kids were in school, they didn't qualify for anything. So the point I'm trying to push is it has to be fair for everyone. People who make more money are getting punished for making more money. So next one. So someone says a permanent school voucher scheme into the tax code that could redirect billions of dollars each year to private schools, even as our public schools, which educate 90% of all students, remain woefully underfunded. That is 110% not true. They give the schools money, and it would be a different podcast to talk about where some of this money goes. What they've been doing in some of the school systems, and I can only speak for Illinois, they hold the money, wait a while, and then they spend it on other things instead of promoting it so that everyone in the school can benefit. Why, again, should a student be punished because both of their parents are working? They're making a decent salary. Decent salary between the two of them could be 80,000. Those people would not qualify for any assistance if they put their kids in private school. So therefore, that's why they wouldn't do it, because they couldn't afford it. And this is why Congress and the president and the Senate finally got it passed. Okay. And schools have to also realize that sometimes it's about what you're teaching in school. I benefited from the fact that when I was in school, we talked about math, we talked about science, we talked about history. It wasn't all of these other things like critical race theory, uh, all of these gender stories and books and all of that stuff. It is okay if people want to talk about that, but it's not okay in the public school when the parents want their kids to learn about academics, not about social issues. All right. And then the last one that I want to talk about, despite the public school debate, there's Senator Cassidy and education advocates argue no child should be trapped in a failing school. So I actually agree with that one. I think it slipped in because I thought that he was saying something else. So the administration had been talking about this for a while. And the reason I'm bringing up this point is the original version looked totally different because they were going to fund more opportunities for people to have school choice and to put their students in private schools. And it really made it in line with a lot of other states. And this is important. And I did some research, and some states are doing a pretty good job on school choice. And the reason I'm saying this is because that's why our republic in the United States works. States are allowed to govern themselves and, based on the will of the people, implement things that help working families. So here's an example. Idaho launched its first private school choice program through a refundable tax credit. Families can receive up to $5,000 per child for private educational expenses, with $7,500 available for students with disabilities. The program is capped at $50 million annually and prioritize families earning up to 300% of the federal poverty level. So that's roughly $96,450 for a family of four. Now, that is the flavor in about 30 states. Now, it is a little interesting that those are red states. Here's what's happening in Illinois. Illinois hasn't passed anything to help working people who make over $50,000 a year to put their kids in private school. But here's what they introduced. HB 2822, which would establish an ESA program for families earning up to 2.5 times the free and reduced price lunch threshold. So that's roughly $148,700 for a family of four, with awards based on income up to 100% of per pupil state aids to schools. Now, this is proposed, and if I had to bet money on it, I would tell you that this will never pass in Illinois. Unfortunately, in Illinois, the mentality of the Democrats running this state is if you make over $50,000 a year, you are responsible if you want to put your kids in private school, and they will not fund that. They're only funded if you're not trying to work or if you're making under $40,000 a year. That's where all of the money would go. So, in certain ways, that doesn't make sense because prior to this ECCA Act being passed, they were getting millions of dollars. Well, what happened to all of that money? So I'm going to research that and I'm going to report back to you about that. So those are two examples of states caring enough about the people or listening to the people to make changes. Also, remember in Virginia, they got a Republican governor based on this very issue, school choice, and what they were teaching in the schools. And the bottom line is that lawmakers need to listen to what the parents, taxpayers, are telling them. And the truth is, to end this conversation is, we have to teach academics, not social issues. And parents in the United States who pay taxes want their kids to go to school to learn academics. Let me know what you think and pass on this podcast to somebody else, and have a great day.